For the next 2 hours, Belinda found herself reluctantly fascinated as Diane explained the complex ecosystem of the creek. She learned how native plants filtered pollutants from runoff before they reached the water, how their root systems prevented erosion, and how they provided food and shelter for a surprising diversity of wildlife. The winding creek watershed isn't just a pretty water feature, Diane explained, her passion evident. It's a living system that connects to every other natural system in our region. When we disrupt one part, we affect the whole. Belinda found herself staring at a photograph of the silvery azure butterfly, its wings an iridescent blue that caught the light like living sapphires. "These have been spotted in our creek?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "Yes, and they're critically dependent on the blue lobelia you removed," Diane said, but without the accusatory tone Belinda expected. Instead, she handed Belinda a potted plant with delicate blue flowers, "which is why you'll be replanting these today." The afternoon found Belinda kneeling in the mud at the creek's edge, designer gardening gloves now genuinely soiled as she carefully planted native species under Diane's supervision. To her surprise, she found the work oddly satisfying. When a cardinal landed nearby, regarding her work with apparent approval, she felt an unexpected surge of accomplishment. "You've got a good touch with those lobelia," Diane commented. "Ever consider volunteering with our restoration team?" Belinda looked up, a smudge of dirt across her cheek, and found herself considering it. "I might have some time. Occasionally." Dawn found Belinda sitting on her back patio, coffee cooling beside her untouched as she watched the early morning mist rise from the creek. 2 weeks had passed since the humiliating HOA meeting. The special election was scheduled for that evening, though its outcome was a foregone conclusion. Maria Lopez had run unopposed for the presidency after Belinda had withdrawn her candidacy. In the pale morning light, a blue heron stalked deliberately through the shallow water, its movements precise and patient. Belinda watched, oddly transfixed, as it stood motionless for long moments, before striking with lightning speed to emerge with a small fish wriggling in its beak. She'd never really watched the creek before, she realized. It had always been merely a landscaping feature, a property boundary to be controlled and maintained, not a living system with its own rhythms and residents. The doorbell's chime startled her from her reverie. She found Diane Reeves on her doorstep, clipboard predictably in hand. "Good morning, Miss Harrington," Diane said, her tone professional but less adversarial than during their previous encounter. "I'm following up on the remediation project. The replanting appears to be taking well, but I wanted to discuss next steps." Belinda hesitated, then gestured toward her patio. "Would you like some coffee? We could discuss it out back." If Diane was surprised by the invitation, she hid it well. They settled into the patio chairs, and Belinda found herself pointing out the heron, still fishing in the morning light. "Great blue heron," Diane confirmed. "They're territorial. That one's probably been fishing this stretch for years." "I had no idea," Belinda admitted quietly. Diane studied her for a moment. "Most people don't notice what's in their own backyards. That's why we do these remediation projects, not just to restore the habitat, but to help people see what's been there all along." Belinda nodded slowly, feeling an uncomfortable but somehow necessary shift in her perspective. "I've been thinking about your volunteer restoration team," she said finally. "I still have some time available now that my HOA duties have been reduced." "We meet Saturdays," Diane said, a hint of a smile softening her official demeanor. "The team would welcome your organizational skills." After Diane left, Belinda remained on her patio, watching the creek with new eyes. The water's surface reflected the morning sky, constantly shifting yet somehow unchanging. Like the neighborhood, she thought. Like herself, perhaps. The day of the special election arrived hot and humid. Belinda dressed carefully, in a subdued blouse and slacks, applied her makeup with characteristic precision, and drove to the community center with a strange sense of calm that had replaced her initial humiliation. The room fell into an awkward hush when she entered. She nodded politely to several neighbors and took a seat at the back, not at the front table where she had presided for so long. Maria Lopez called the meeting to order, handling the proceedings with a natural grace that Belinda grudgingly admired. When the formalities of the election were complete and Maria was officially installed as the new HOA president, she opened the floor for community announcements. The woman in the khaki uniform was Diane Reeves, Senior Environmental Resource Officer for the county, and she was not impressed by Belinda's Habitat Protection Initiative. Standing on Belinda's doorstep with clipboard in hand and a severe expression on her weathered face, she looked like an avenging angel of bureaucracy. "Ms. Harrington, I'm here about the unauthorized modifications to the Winding Creek Watershed Protection Zone," she said, her voice carrying the weight of regulatory authority. "You've installed signage, surveillance equipment, and restrictive barriers without permits or environmental impact assessment." Belinda adopted her most pleasant smile, the one she used at charity fundraisers when cornered by people asking for larger donations. "Officer Reeves, I'm simply protecting the natural habitat from disturbance. As HOA president, it's my responsibility too." "You have no jurisdiction over this land," Diane interrupted, flipping through papers on her clipboard. "Furthermore, according to our records, you were cited last month for removing protected riparian vegetation and replacing it with non-native ornamental species." "Those weeds were unsightly," Belinda protested. "I improved the aesthetic value of." "Those weeds were native cardinal flower and bulobalia, critical food sources for the endangered silvery azure butterfly that breeds in this watershed." Diane's tone could have frozen lava. "And now you've installed cameras and restrictive barriers that interfere with wildlife movement patterns. I'm issuing a cease and desist order. All unauthorized additions must be removed within 24 hours." She thrust a handful of official-looking papers into Belinda's hands. "Additionally, here's information about the Watershed Restoration Program. Since you've already disturbed the habitat, you'll need to participate in mandatory remediation efforts." "Remediation? I don't have time for." "Your alternative is a fine of $10,000 for environmental disruption in a protected zone," Diane said evenly. Belinda clutched the papers, her mind racing. $10,000 would put a significant dent in her plans for a kitchen remodel. "I'll review these materials." "Excellent. The first restoration workshop is Saturday morning, 8 a.m. sharp." With a curt nod, Diane returned to her truck, leaving Belinda standing in her doorway, official papers crumpled in her white-knuckled grip. The neighborhood grapevine worked with remarkable efficiency. By afternoon, everyone knew about Belinda's confrontation with the county official. Belinda could feel the whispers following her as she walked to her mailbox, could see the barely concealed smirks from neighbors who had chafed under her strict HOA regime for years. Adding insult to injury, a county crew arrived promptly the next morning to remove her signs, caution tape, and cameras. Belinda watched from behind her living room curtains, unable to bear the public humiliation of witnessing their removal in person. Saturday arrived with offensive brightness, birds chirping with what Belinda perceived as mockery as she pulled into the community center parking lot. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, expensive but practical outdoor wear that suggested she regularly communed with nature, though the tags had been removed just that morning. To her dismay, the restoration workshop was attended by several of her neighbors, including George Wilson and Maria Lopez, both of whom offered suspiciously cheerful greetings. Diane Reeves stood at the front of the room beside a table covered with what appeared to be plants in small containers. "Welcome to our Watershed Restoration Workshop," Diane began. "Today we'll learn about the crucial role of native species in maintaining the health of our local waterways." Belinda found herself rising from her chair, heart pounding as heads turned in surprise. "I'd like to invite everyone to join the county's Watershed Restoration Program," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "They need volunteers for the replanting effort this Saturday. I've signed up to help coordinate the planting teams, and I thought others might want to participate as well." A beat of stunned silence followed before George Wilson spoke up. "What time should we be there?" 8 a.m., Belinda replied. "Wear clothes you don't mind getting muddy." She managed a small, self-deprecating smile. "I learned that the hard way." A ripple of laughter broke the tension, not mocking but somehow inclusive. After the meeting, As people gathered in small groups, Belinda found herself approached by the young couple she had confronted at the creek weeks earlier, the confrontation that had started everything. "We heard you're organizing the restoration project," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Emma, by the way. This is my husband, Liam. We'd love to help." Belinda shook their hands, the simple human connection feeling both foreign and necessary. "I'm bringing coffee and donuts," she offered. "The work goes better with proper sustenance." "We'll bring our reusable cups," Emma smiled. As Belinda walked to her car alone, she paused at the edge of the parking lot, looking down the gentle slope to where the creek curved through the neighborhood. A flash of iridescent blue caught her eye. Just a glimpse, there and gone so quickly, she couldn't be certain she'd actually seen it. But she liked to think it was a silvery azure butterfly, perhaps descended from eggs laid on the blue lobelia she had planted with her own hands, now taking flight over water that belonged to no one and everyone at once. The creek bubbled on, indifferent to human drama, yet somehow transformative in its constancy. Belinda stood watching it for a long moment before getting into her car, already mentally reorganizing her Saturday schedule to accommodate creek cleaning, and wondering if her gardening gloves would ever recover from their newfound purpose. The shriek that erupted from Belinda Harrington's throat could have shattered the pristine morning calm of Whispering Pines subdivision. Instead, it merely sent a family of nesting cardinals into panicked flight as she stood at the edge of her manicured lawn, designer gardening gloves clutched to her chest, staring in abject horror at what could only be described as an environmental hostage situation. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Belinda, known throughout the neighborhood as Karen since the infamous pool filter incident of 2023, bellowed toward the young couple currently setting up what appeared to be a modest picnic along the creek that marked the border of her property. The couple froze, their half-unfolded checkered blankets suspended between them like a surrender flag. The man, bearded, probably a millennial, Belinda thought with immediate disdain, stepped forward. "Just enjoying the public green space, ma'am," he said, gesturing to the narrow strip of wildflowers and reeds that ran alongside the burbling water. "Perfect spot for breakfast." Belinda's perfectly highlighted bob quivered with indignation. "Public? Public? This creek is part of my property. I am the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, and I can assure you that this entire waterway falls under our jurisdiction." It didn't, of course. The Winding Creek watershed was county property, a fact documented clearly in every homeowner's deed, including Belinda's. But facts were malleable things in Belinda's world, useful when they served her purposes, disposable when they didn't. The woman, now clutching a mason jar of what was undoubtedly some kind of abominable kale smoothie, spoke up. "Actually, according to the county maps, this is protected public land. It's a designated green space corridor." "I don't know what hippie propaganda you've been reading," Belinda snapped, pulling her phone from the pocket of her immaculately pressed khakis, "but I'm calling the police. This is trespassing." As she punched in the numbers with her meticulously manicured nails, a small crowd began to gather. George Wilson from 2 doors down, walking his corgi, the Martinez family pausing their bike ride, elderly Mrs. Abernathy leaning heavily on her cane, eyes bright with interest at the brewing drama. The responding officer, a weary-looking man who had clearly dealt with Belinda before, arrived quickly. Too quickly for Belinda's liking. It suggested her calls weren't being given the gravity they deserved. "Officer Davis," she began before he'd even closed his car door, "these people are trespassing on HOA property, refusing to leave, and have damaged protected flora." Officer Davis surveyed the scene. The couple's untouched blanket, the unopened picnic basket, the completely undisturbed wildflowers. "Miss Harrington," he said carefully, "we've been through this before. The creek and 15 feet on either side are county property. These folks have every right to be here." "That is absolutely ridiculous." Belinda's voice climbed an octave. "I pay property taxes. My lawn service maintains this area. I had them remove all those awful weeds just last week and plant proper flowers." The officer's expression shifted from weariness to concern. "You had landscapers work in the watershed buffer zone." "Ma'am, That's actually against county environmental regulations. The native plants here protect the creek's ecosystem. Well, I didn't know that, Belinda said dismissively, though the slight flush in her cheeks suggested otherwise. You received 3 notices about it last month, George Wilson piped up helpfully from the growing audience. Remember, after you had them cut down the black willows because they were, and I quote, messy and attracting too many birds. Belinda shot him a glare that could have frozen the creek solid. This wasn't going as planned, but Belinda Harrington didn't become HOA president by accepting defeat. Fine, she said coolly. If the county wants to play games, so can I. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her colonial-style home, already formulating her next move. The watershed might not be hers officially, but she would make sure nobody enjoyed it. If she couldn't have exclusive access to the babbling creek and its picturesque banks, then nobody would. Behind her, the couple hesitantly resumed their picnic setup, exchanging concerned glances as Belinda slammed her front door so hard that one of her precious decorative wreaths tilted askew. Tuesday evening's HOA meeting was unusually well attended. Belinda entered the community center's multi-purpose room to find nearly every chair filled, a stark contrast to the typical meetings where attendance barely met quorum requirements. The buzz of conversation died down as she made her way to the front, chin held high despite the knowing looks exchanged among her neighbors. Good evening, she began with forced brightness, shuffling her meticulously prepared agenda papers. Before we address new business, I'd like to clarify some misinformation that's been circulating about the Creek Preservation Initiative. From the back row, George Wilson's hand shot up. Point of order, Madam President. We've added an item to tonight's agenda under new business regarding the HOA's legal boundaries of authority. Specifically, a motion to formally recognize county jurisdiction over the Winding Creek watershed and to prohibit HOA funds from being used for unauthorized modifications to protected land. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Belinda's smile remained fixed, though her knuckles whitened around her gavel. That item wasn't approved for the agenda, she countered. Maria Lopez stood, holding up a sheet of paper. Actually, we submitted it last week according to bylaws, with signatures from 1/3 of homeowners as required for emergency additions. We have the receipt confirming delivery to your mailbox. Trapped by her own bureaucratic rules, Belinda nodded stiffly. We'll address it under new business then. Now, regarding the monthly landscaping report. I move to suspend the standard agenda and proceed directly to the watershed jurisdiction item, called another voice. Second, came at least 3 responses simultaneously. Belinda swallowed hard. All in favor, a forest of hands rose. Motion carries, she managed. What followed was nothing short of a neighborhood revolt. One by one, residents approached the microphone to express concerns about her unilateral decisions. The misappropriation of HOA funds for the signs and cameras, and the environmental damage caused by her landscaping directives. My daughter's science class uses the creek for water quality testing, said one father. They had to cancel their field trip because of the caution tape and threatening signs. I've lived on this creek for 20 years, said elderly Mrs. Abernathy, her voice quavering but determined. I watch the herons fish there every morning. It's not your private view to control, Belinda. Most devastating was Brad's betrayal. Her supposedly loyal vice president stood and formally moved that the HOA adopt a new environmental policy recognizing the ecological importance of the watershed and committing to work collaboratively with county officials on appropriate maintenance. All in favor? He asked, usurping her authority to call the vote. The response was unanimous, except for Belinda's lone dissenting hand. Motion carries, Brad announced, not quite meeting her eyes. Belinda sat in stunned silence as the meeting continued around her, residents now enthusiastically discussing plans for a community creek cleanup day and educational signage about the watershed's ecological value. We could partner with the county's environmental education program, Maria suggested. They offer grants for community-based conservation projects. My company might sponsor interpretive signs about the wildlife, offered another resident. Belinda's incredulity hardened into something between rage and humiliation. This wasn't just about the creek anymore. This was a coup, a direct challenge to her authority. When she finally found her voice, it emerged as a cold, clipped declaration. As AHOA president, I retain executive decision-making power regarding all expenditures, she stated, and I will not approve funding for any of these projects. The room fell silent momentarily before George Wilson cleared his throat. Actually, there's one more item of business. He stood, straightening his shoulders. Under Article 7 of our bylaws, we've initiated a no-confidence vote in the current HOA leadership, with signatures from the required 40% of homeowners. Belinda felt the blood drain from her face as Brad slid a thick stack of papers in front of her, page after page of signatures from her neighbors. This can't be legal, she whispered, but even to her own ears, she sounded defeated. Special election will be held in 2 weeks, George continued. In the meantime, all non-essential HOA decisions are suspended. As the meeting adjourned, residents filed past her with awkward nods or averted gazes. No one spoke to her directly. No one invited her to join the enthusiastic cluster of people signing up for the creek cleanup. Belinda sat alone at the table long after everyone had gone, staring at the signature pages that had effectively ended her reign. Outside the window, she could see the creek glimmering under moonlight. By noon, Belinda's dining room table had been transformed into a war room. Spread across the polished mahogany surface were county zoning maps, HOA bylaws, and printouts of local environmental regulations that she had skimmed just thoroughly enough to find loopholes. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, she highlighted passages with decisive flicks of her wrist, the fluorescent yellow marker squeaking against the paper. "Brad, I need you to back me on this," she said into her phone, drumming her fingers impatiently. Brad Thornton was the HOA vice president, a position he held primarily because he found it easier to agree with Belinda than oppose her. "We need to call an emergency meeting. This creek situation is out of control." Out of control? Brad's voice carried confusion. "It's just people occasionally using the public space, isn't it? My kids like to look for tadpoles down there sometimes." Belinda's eye twitched. "Your children have been disturbing the natural habitat." "Brad, this is exactly the problem. Nobody respects boundaries anymore. Next thing you know, we'll have homeless encampments and teenagers drinking beer down there. I think you're catastrophizing a bit. 7 o'clock, my house. Make sure the board knows it's mandatory." Belinda interrupted before hanging up. She turned to her laptop and began furiously typing an email to the neighborhood listserv. Your GNT, environmental, art. Dear valued Whispering Pines residents, it has come to my attention that our community is facing an imminent environmental crisis. The watershed area that runs through our development is being subjected to inappropriate public use that threatens the delicate ecosystem. Effective immediately, I am implementing the following protective measures. No recreational activities permitted within 50 feet of the creek. All access points will be marked with caution tape. Photographic documentation of any trespassers will be submitted to authorities. A security camera system will be installed to monitor wildlife disturbances. Your cooperation is not optional. Remember, protecting property values is protecting your investment. In community vigilance, Belinda Harrington, President, Whispering Pines, HOA. She hit send with a satisfied smile, then pulled up the website for a local landscaping company. By the time the emergency meeting rolled around, she had commissioned custom no-trespasing, pro-TCT'd habitat signs, ordered 500 feet of yellow caution tape, and scheduled the installation of 3 wildlife monitoring cameras aimed directly at the creek. The emergency meeting was less than harmonious. Though Belinda had strategically served her signature white wine spritzers, the mood remained tense as neighbors questioned the legal authority of the HOA to restrict access to county property. "I just don't understand why this is suddenly an issue now," said Maria Lopez, a new board member who had made the mistake of running on a platform of more community, less restriction. "Because," Belinda explained with exaggerated patience, I witnessed firsthand how people are disrupting the natural environment. Did you know that creek is home to the spotted creek salamander? Very endangered, very sensitive to human presence. I've lived here 15 years and never heard of a spotted creek salamander, George Wilson said skeptically. That's because they're so endangered, Belinda snapped. The point is, we have a responsibility to protect our natural resources. By putting up caution tape and security cameras, Maria asked. Exactly. Belinda smiled tightly. All in favor? Brad raised his hand immediately, followed reluctantly by two others. Belinda raised her own hand with flourish. Motion carries. We'll begin implementation tomorrow. The next morning, residents of Whispering Pines woke to find the creek area transformed. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the breeze, creating a garish border around the once inviting natural space. Metal signs hammered into the ground at 10-foot intervals warned of habitat protection and threatened prosecution for trespassers. 3 conspicuous security cameras peered down from newly installed posts. Belinda surveyed her work with satisfaction from her kitchen window, sipping her morning coffee. That's when she spotted the county truck pulling up across the street. A woman in a khaki uniform stepped out, clipboard in hand, and began examining the caution tape with a furrowed brow. Belinda's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. This wasn't part of the plan.